When I investigated the places where Psalm 2 is alluded to in the New Testament, I found that in all of them there is a near reference to Satan, angels, or demons. And I think in most of these cases it is clear that the authority of Jesus as God's anointed king is being compared over against other spiritual powers. For so many New Testament writers to use the psalm in a similar way, this would suggest that Psalm 2 was a spiritual warfare testimonium. That is, even before the New Testament documents were written, in the first few decades of Christianity, this psalm was being read to illuminate spiritual warfare. I am making videos on 3 of these Psalm 2 passages in the New Testament. This one will cover 2 Peter and the use of the psalm to introduce angels who sinned by sleeping with women. In 2 Peter, the author is arguing against Epicureans who do not believe Christ will come again to judge the world. Epicureans were the ancient counterparts of modern-day naturalists. That is, they thought of all existence as just being matter in motion, and everything was the result of chance. The gods, if they existed at all, were a long way away, and they don't care much about what's going on down here. As such, they tended to be very skeptical toward old epics, which in the context of the church would include stories like the creation week or the flood of Noah. They also labeled as myth any version of a future judgment in which people were held accountable for their lives, whether the pagan versions of the final judgment or Judeo-Christian varieties. It's strange to imagine that Epicureanism could have made its way into the ancient church, but it did, and as a result, people were doubting the second coming of Jesus, even at church. But then again, maybe it's not so weird. Christians in the modern world don't seem to be especially concerned with the second coming either. Nevertheless, Peter will now deal with those who doubt the second coming of Jesus. Peter says, quote, "We did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ." And interestingly, to prove the second coming, he refers to the transfiguration event recorded in the Synoptic Gospels. Quote, "Jesus received honor and glory from God the Father, and the voice came to him from the majestic glory. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." This is a citation of Psalm chapter 2, where God anoints his king, who then brings judgment on his enemies. Then he says, "And so we have the prophetic word made more sure, to which you do well to pay attention." Now, what prophetic word is he talking about? Some scholars think it's a reference to prophecies about the second coming generally. But since he just cited Psalm 2, and since Psalm 2 is about the anointed king bringing judgment on his enemies, this is likely the prophetic word he's referring to. Jesus is appointed as eschatological judge in Psalm 2, and this prophetic word was made more sure at the transfiguration when the words of the psalm were spoken over Jesus. He then proceeds to make the case for his opponent's destruction on Judgment Day by using examples involving angels, which he borrows from the book of Jude. New Testament scholars have long recognized that the author of 2 Peter is using material from the New Testament book of Jude because apparently he has a high opinion of Jude's work. So very quickly, what do we have in Jude? Jude is making a case against antinomians who have been speaking against the angels who brought God's Torah to Mount Sinai. I have other videos on how the law of Moses was given by God through angels. Peter uses Jude's material in a different way, however. He is making his case against those who presumptuously mock the devil and his angels whenever they are warned about falling under the influence and the condemnation of the devil. So several of Jude's examples still work well for Peter, even though it's a different context. Now, Jude proves judgment using several allusions to older stories, including the Exodus, the angels who sinned by marrying women before the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, which is another angel story, an allusion to the Testament of Moses, where the angel Michael disputes with the devil. Then he has a warning for his audience when they speak against angels. Then very quickly in one verse, he has Cain, Balaam, and Korah. Then finally, judgment against the wicked from 1st Enoch. Now, Peter redacts his Jude material in an interesting way. First, the easy part. He gets rid of obscure references from pseudepigraphal books. Now, some think it's because Peter is unfamiliar with these books, but it is more likely that he doesn't want to scandalize his audience by using books that are not in the Hebrew Bible. So he drops these references that he got from Jude's material. Peter extends his reference to the antediluvian rebellion to include the flood itself. That is, the angels who slept with women before the flood. He goes ahead and includes the flood in this too. Why does he do this? Later on, he will accuse his opponents of being ignorant of the flood, so including it here fits his purposes. Also, unlike Jude, Peter doesn't only want to show judgment, he wants to show the salvation of the godly as well. So he further extends his reference to the flood to include the rescue of Noah's family, and he adds the rescue of Lot to the Sodom and Gomorrah reference from Jude. This is where it gets tricky. The Exodus would be perfect for Peter's purposes so far. It is a story where God puts a clear distinction between his people and those under judgment. Yet despite how well this works in Peter's context, not to mention how famous the Exodus story is, he ends up leaving out the Exodus reference. This is puzzling. We will come back to this. Similarly, with Korah, again, a clear distinction is made between Korah's people and Moses' people, with one group destroyed and the other saved. Also, Korah is a false teacher from within the community. Peter has discussed this very thing in the immediate context. So again, it's so puzzling that Peter deletes the Korah reference that he got from the book of Jude. We will also come back to this. The omission of the Cain reference from Jude is not puzzling. In Cain's story, no one is saved, and it is not even a good example of final judgment against the wicked, since the offender, Cain, is spared in Genesis, and so he is omitted. It is at this juncture that I introduce what I think is the most important editing principle governing what Peter keeps from Jude and what he gets rid of. Because his opponents are reviling angels, that is, they are speaking against dark angels because they underestimate the power of dark angels to influence them or to harm them, and indeed, this could be a warning against certain Pentecostals and charismatics who speak too openly and too freely against the fallen powers, but nevertheless, Peter only wants to keep stories in which there is an inappropriate encounter or a hostile dialogue between angels and people. This could help explain a lot of things. First of all the episodes that we have eliminated already on other grounds also did not have scenes where the human-angel boundary is tested. It can also explain why Exodus and Korah are not included in Peter, even though they fit Peter's other intentions so well. These two stories don't include angels and humans interacting with each other in a violating or foolish way, so they are omitted. So these are the only three he keeps. The antediluvian rebellion, that is, angels sleeping with women before the flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, and Balaam, and he makes some additions to all three of these references. One of the major boons for my argument that Peter is only using Old Testament stories that include strange relations between angels and people shows up in how he treats the Balaam material. Jude mentions Balaam's greed, and that's all. They have rushed for profit into Balaam's error, he says. Peter significantly expands and specifies his reference to Balaam to focus in on the material in Numbers 22, where there is a tense meeting between a human and an angel, where Balaam is doing the wrong thing, and the angel opposes him. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out to oppose you because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned aside before me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely just now I would have killed you and let her live. I'm not saying that the angel in this story is a bad angel, but the language of Satan from the Hebrew Bible and diabolos from the Greek Old Testament may have influenced Peter's decision to make this modification, since he is polemicizing against those who have been lampooning against fallen angels. Note that this places the warning against his angel slandering audience in between the Sodom and the Balaam stories. These two stories share features that could have occasioned Peter's comparison between the two and his modifications to the Balaam material. For example, the men in Genesis are ignorant of their prospective victim's angelic identity, and they end up struck with blindness as a consequence. Balaam is ignorant of the angel because he can't see him, but later he is unblinded. These two angelic episodes involving ignorance fit the warning that is in between them in 2 Peter, because there he warns his opponents that they blaspheme in matters about which they are ignorant. By making modifications to Balaam, Peter has created 3 references in a row to those whose ignorance precipitates foolish behavior regarding angels. Now, I think postulating transgressions against the dividing line between angels and men as the main redactional principle, or the main editing principle, helps to explain the episodes eliminated from Jude's material, including the 2 difficult stories of the Exodus and Korah's rebellion. It also explains the episodes retained, as well as the modifications that he makes to the Balaam material. And not to forget Peter's most notable addition, the allusion to Psalm 2 and Jesus' appointment as eschatological judge at the Transfiguration event. For a Psalm 2 scene to be followed by editorial work on Jude meant to highlight the destruction of fallen angels and those who will perish with the fallen angels because they sin against the angels. All of this conduces to my thesis that Psalm 2 was used to elevate Jesus above angelic powers.